Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's been a great and productive day so far. I'm super happy to present the last session of Unconvention 2021. As they say, last but not the least, Wilgrow has put its best foot forward to curate this beautiful session for all of you. It's a panel discussion moderated by Mr. Srinivas, CEO at Wilgrow Innovations Foundation. And in this session, you can look forward to knowing from the experts the importance of the role invention plays to build a resilient future. Along with Srinivas, we have Maggie from Lemelson Foundation, Ritika from Titan, Pradeep Nair from Faut Foundation, and Anushri from Waterfield Financial and Investment Advisors. Please do not miss this. Over to you, Mr. Srinivas.
Hey, thank you, Bala. Like you said, this is the last but not the least, but it's also very exciting for me. And I think I really should say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're viewing this from, because I know their audiences have been global this time. What we want to talk about here is something exciting. I mean, it's literally a silver lining of sorts. The pandemic, triggered a lot of innovation across sectors. Supply chains got reinvented, technology was increasingly deployed. A lot of places sort of bounced back, really fought against the constraints that which blocked them down. But what we want to do is not lose this urgency or not lose this kind of really out of the box thinking that's leading to designing of solutions that are both one uniquely Indian, but also keeping a lot of resource constraints in mind. And this, frankly, gave us at Wilgrow an opportunity and an opening to sustain this momentum and retain this focus as we try to invent for a resilient future and as we try to keep designing for impact. And that's why we have some really exciting folks. And as we jump right into it, I know each of them are going to be speaking about their interests and why they are here. So, Pradeep, why don't you just talk about Ford Foundations and your personal interest in seeing how you're trying to catalyze local venture philanthropy and your interest in making the space far more sustainable and resilient?
Sure. Thank you. Good evening and good morning to everyone watching. I think so. I work with the Ford Foundation. I head the Ford Foundation's work in this region. Our association with Wilgrow goes back at least 4 years, I think, and it was one of the first organizations when I joined that I had the privilege of meeting and having discussions with. In this particular area of work, Ford Foundation's interest is honestly just trying to see how we can get private capital and patient capital together to help social enterprises solve the social problems that all of us really care about. We've always believed that there is a role for both patient and private capital. I think the challenge for us in the past has been in most cases, both of these work in silos, trying to address very similar issues, but obviously not leveraging each other's resources. Which is why now 4 years ago, one of the quests we were on was how do we identify organizations that also have the same goals and have a network on the ground that we could possibly partner with, which is how we came across Wilgrow. And I remember in our early conversations, it took quite a while before we decided to partner with Wilgrow. In our early conversations, we would keep getting back to Wilgrow and say that what we are really interested is in identifying the systematic issues that exist in this particular sector and seeing how we could support them. And what we also shared with Wilgrow is that we have a huge appetite for any kinds of financial risk, any kind of failures. So that is not at all an issue for us as a foundation. But what we were missing is we were not seeing too many organizations that were addressing systematic issues. So if you take incubators as an example, which is the space that Wilgrow specializes in, we were seeing quite a few incubators who would come to us and send proposals about incubating a specific set of incubatees or enterprises that were working in a specific sector. And for us, we had done quite a bit of that in the past, and we just didn't know how that would be replicable or scalable because today you would be funding social enterprises working in poverty, tomorrow in healthcare, and so on and so forth. But we were missing the systematic issues that we thought existed in the sector, and we were not seeing too many organizations who worked at that. And after several rounds of conversations and, with Wilgrow, we were finally able to arrive at, I think, what we thought were fundamental and systematic issues, whether it's data, whether using technology. Just two things I think that we were really interested in. And Wilgrow offered us solutions that they thought would address both of these. So that's what started us in this journey of working with Wilgrow. And along the journey, one of the things that we were also hoping they would focus on, and 3 days ago when they actually launched Vitals, we were very happy that they did also address that. We were really hoping that whatever came out of this would also be a public good. And Vitals, which is a platform that we were fortunate to partner with Wilgrow on, was not only addressing some of the systematic issues in data and technology, but also was the intent is to actually make it a public good, something that would be available to anyone who would be interested, whether you're an incubator or social enterprise. So I'll just, again, just want to thank the Wilgrow team. I know it was a huge effort to actually put together this product. And from what I have seen so far, it already looks like something that we would like to share with everyone else in this space who's been using it. But overall, the journey for us with Wilgrow has been, for us, a very educative one. And we're really hoping that working on these kind of issues, and these are just a few systematic issues, and by no means are they solved. There's still a long way to go. But I think for us, our biggest takeaway from this has been that it is possible to identify issues that would benefit the larger ecosystem, and with the right kind of partnership, hopefully address those also.
Hey, thank you, Pradeep. I'm taking away something fundamental that you said, right? Trying to fix systematic risks, accepting failures, knowing that even though if you're doing grant making, in this sort of nonprofit world, there is going to be a failure, but it's key to sort of be objective, understand what's coming out of that failure, and then building better. And on that note, I actually want to ask Maggie to talk about some of the work that Levelson Foundation is doing, what they're keen on. The Levelson Foundation has been extraordinarily helpful to Wilgrow. They've supported us for the last 15 years. They've been some of our most patient supporters as we've worked with inventors, struggled with failures, learned a lot. So Maggie, what's the ethos that Levelson Foundation has been working under?
Yeah, a lot of what Pradeep said really resonates. We have been working with Wilgrow for a long time before it was Wilgrow. And I think it's been almost 18 years now. And it's been really integral to our learning and sort of development of how we work. We, I think, have learned a lot about how to partner more effectively. Collaborating with and investing in partners that have the same long-term perspective that we do, and learning about what works alongside them through some of those failures. And I think this is part of what has really led us to recognizing building capacity within a localized ecosystem means trusting partners to identify gaps and priorities, and that it means that we have to adapt our strategy to a dynamic environment. Those systemic barriers are going to change, they're going to evolve, and therefore we need to change and evolve our strategy as well. And so when we talk about committing to a systems approach and similar to what Pradeep described, that does require patience. We're investing in institutions and localized capacity that strengthens this supportive system. But we ultimately think it's a more efficient and impactful use of our funding because there's exponential leverage when we do that. So I might try to demonstrate this a little bit through a comparative example. So I'm sitting in the foundation, and if I want to have impact, I can increase my overhead and hire staff that are going to have the market expertise, and they're going to make grants or investments into social innovators fulfilling a particular impact-oriented mission. And after a number of years, I would likely have several companies that are successful in achieving that impact. I've had several that also would not be successful. But my only real levers for increasing my impact are more funding or improved selection and screening processes. And my actions are unlikely to reduce the costs and barriers for other funders to support social innovators. And my impact is going to be limited to the companies that I've supported directly while deploying funds in that market. Alternatively, when I invest in a system, I'm going to need to meet it where it is in terms of maturity. And that means over the past 18 years or 20 years in India, we started with interventions that inspired and educated a pipeline of social innovators and inventors. And then we invested in capacity and incubators like Vilgro that support them and weave together a supportive system of actors, making seed capital and expertise more readily available to those companies. And ultimately, I'm also starting to need to mobilize downstream capital to ensure that limited access to growth capital is not what prevents the scale of impact that we're seeking. In that systems approach, there are many more levers for impact. And my goal is not just to see the companies that our funds indirectly support through sub-grants and programs succeed. Our potential for impact is now leveraged and extends well into the future through a system that's more robust and effective in supporting the kinds of innovations that are going to have impact long after our funding runs out. So our goal ultimately within each country that we work is to have a resilient engine for addressing social and environmental problems. And our particular brand of that just happens to be a focus on physical inventions, because we think that those are essential and also underserved. And so we're always sort of folding that into our work.
Thank you, Maggie. And I just realized, it struck me sort of as you speaking, as that foray from, I remember those days in 2009 when you were doing the RAMP program, trying to inspire more students to then giving seed capital to inventors and, healthcare, energy, agriculture, to that pilot that we've just started in trying to help social enterprise also get debt capital, right? So I think it's been this fabulous journey. And before actually I go to Anushri, I want to also bring in Ritika. I think Ritika represents a rare CSR organization, an Indian CSR organization, which is keen on designing for social impact, which supports designers. Ritika, can you just tell us about your philosophy? And you are unique. I mean, in this sense, you also echo a lot of what the other two are saying, but I want to hear from you.
Sure. Thanks, Rini. And hi, everybody. So at Titan, when we were talking our strategy, one of the things that our board asked us to do is to work on design, a program around design. So Titan is quintessentially a design company, a product design company. And how can we bring that core to even this area of CSR, right? So that was the ask of the board. And that's how we spun out a program called Design Impact Awards, which is basically a grant program. And it is to support product design, which is hard good product design. And that was our focus. Like how Maggie mentioned, we also found out in our research as to how this area of product design is so much in need versus, and requires so much more infra and support because of the nature, of product design, hard good product design vis-a-vis software or platform design, which can still augment this, but yet the core was, product design for us. And so these grants have been rolled out. In our very first edition, which got launched in 2017, we got 993 applications. These applicants had to have a prototype and they had to have an impact story. So from that perspective, we were overwhelmed with the response, and we had a very long, engaging jury process, which included like a 50 jury members across sectors. And we also engaged our participants throughout the process. So it wasn't that the winners take it all, but a large participant number take back value from participating in the program. And we actually designed the program as we went along, because we just didn't know how it would be. So that was our first edition. And as we speak, the grants have been rolled out, and these grants are projectized. So each grant, which is basically the size of 65 lakhs, $100,000 for each of the grantee, which is, and we have 8 winners. So, these grants were designed in a manner that they make the maximum impact using the grant. And these are given in tranches as per the milestones. So, right now, presently, what we are launching next in Design Impact program is called Design Impact Movement, which is something to do with inspiring more and more youth to design for social needs. And how can we connect the dots for them, and how can we actually give them what already exists in terms of knowledge, and having then them to discover it as they go along, and shortening that learning curve. So I would, if Bala can help us, can project the link of Design Impact Movement. It's called designimpactmovement.titan.in. It's just out of the oven right now, and we are just launching it with our first webinar on Saturday.
All right, Ritika, so we've basically posted the link on Hubilo. So this is going to be visible to all the attendees.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. So, what I'm seeing is also we talk about leverage, we talk about handling systemic risk, we talk about institutional. I think folks like Ritika, folks like Titan CSR, and the focus on designing for India, designing for the situation that you're in, beyond just the software and platforms, is, I think, beginning to take off. And Anushri, that's why I want to pull you in, and it's going to be a very interesting conversation, because at Waterfield Advisors, you've been working with a whole variety of family offices, right? Many of them have been entrepreneurs in their own rights, have been investors, have also, some of them have been giving charities. But this conversation here is talking about financial return, social return, but building for a future which needs patience. Many of those tick those boxes even for those family offices. But how do you see this? How do you see this getting traction? Gaining some kind of currency, so to speak, with your clients.
Sure. Thanks, Srini, and good morning, good evening, everyone. And thanks, Srini, for having me here on the panel. My name is Anushri, and I work at Waterfield Advisors. I lead the impact portfolio there. As Srini suggested, the impact spectrum that we cover starts with your traditional philanthropy, which is very plain grant making, then to venture philanthropy, CSR advisory, innovative finance, impact investment, and now ESG. In fact, we've become the first wealth advisors and multifamily office in India to sign up for the UN Principles of Responsible Investment. And so really, the idea of a multifamily office, a wealth advisory firm, embracing the impact, the purpose, is really embedded into the ethos of Waterfield as we speak. And it's been a conscious kind of endeavor on our side to really help our families. These are mainly ultra high net worth families. They have investable assets anywhere upwards of $10 million. So the intent really has been to help them really adopt a wider view of wealth, which not just encompasses obviously financial sort of wealth, but also the human, the social, the environmental side of wealth, right? And so preserve and grow all these aspects of wealth. In terms of entrepreneurship, our experience actually shows that family offices are natural allies to entrepreneurs, right? Like Srini, as you mentioned, a lot of family offices were started by entrepreneurs who have now really grown them, right? So they're very empathetic to the cause. it's a lived experience for them. They've experienced the ups and downs. They know the hard work that goes into really starting and growing a business, right? Even in terms of the next gen, we actually find that the next generation is very entrepreneurial. They are exploring their own ways of really growing the business, but in a very savvy, a very clued in way, where they want to use technology, or they want to bring in AI. So again, it's a sort of culture of entrepreneurship is very much embedded in bettered by regulations. This is domestic capital that we're talking about. So, the kind of constraints that, say, the CSR regulations may pose, or the FCRA funds sort of, the regulations poses. These family offices typically don't have to deal with that. A lot of them already have set up foundations and trusts, right? So they are also able to be more flexible in terms of the kind of financial structures and instruments they're able to use. So right from grants to equity to debt to sort of, blended finance, innovative financing, they're really open to all of that, right? We've also seen that because of the kind of networks they are in, they also make excellent sort of amplifiers. So they not only come and invest, but it's also a signaling impact. And, they actually bring in other peers, other investors, give a lot of confidence to, investors who are kind of starting out with this asset class for the first time. So all in all, look, this is, organically, this set of investors, funders, donors are very aligned to entrepreneurship. In fact, just internally, we've seen over the last year, despite COVID-19, or maybe because of it, I don't know, we've actually seen increase of 53% in terms of asset allocation to this particular asset class, right? Which is entrepreneur startups, which has happened mainly from a VCPE perspective. Which brings me to the fact that how can family offices now be made relevant to social entrepreneurship, right? So everything that I've spoken, obviously, the culture of entrepreneurship, etc., applies to the VCPE sort of mindset. When it comes to social entrepreneurship, we're seeing two types of approaches within families. So one is an investment first. So they, look at social enterprises as a new asset class, very similar to the way they would approach any other startup, which may not have a social or an environmental mandate. They obviously prioritize financial returns. So, they want at market kind of returns. And that does influence the choices that they make in terms of the funds they work with, the growth stage of enterprises they're working with, the kind of sectors they're picking. It's still very fintech, it's still maybe SaaS applied to the social sector, but led by, some of these sectors who've traditionally seen good returns, right? So that's one aspect of it. That currently is a popular approach within the the family offices, and it's also due to the fact that the impact funds, the PEVC ecosystem has really been quite successful in reaching out to family offices, engaging them. A lot of family offices are actually headed by sort of ex-investment professionals, so there is an affinity, there is also a natural understanding of that sector. The second approach, which is something that we really want to catalyze, is around impact first. So we're seeing families who have philanthropic roots or track record, right? Who have actually engaged hands-on with social issues. We're seeing these families really bring in the impact first approach. Now, they make ideal funders, ideal investors, ideal LPs, because they are driving the focus on impact, right? Right and center. So whether it is asking about, how is impact or, considerations incorporated across the investment life cycle to actually make sure that the GPs and the investees are measuring impact, reporting on it, managing it, improving it. This demand is coming from the group of LPs who really want to, sort of bring the impact back into impact investment, right? Obviously, there are a set of challenges that, they face. Some challenges, obviously, like, Pradeep and Maggie have said, are very systemic, which the entire ecosystem is grappling with in terms of how do we measure impact, how do we manage impact, etc. And there are some challenges that are specific to family offices, mainly the fact that, we've sometimes seen that decision making is it takes some time, it's convoluted. There's a lack of urgency because there is no regulation that kind of mandates that you have to spend your money every year. So a little bit of sort of, lack of urgency in terms of how quickly they take these decisions. And I think the second challenge that we've seen, which we're now trying to kind of navigate or address, is there's the intent to support startups and young startups, young social enterprises, but I think the effort required is sometimes underestimated, right? So it's felt that it's easy to do this. I think the realization that we need a lot more partners, incubators such as Will Grow, intermediaries to really come in and offer that hand holding is gradually sinking in, but we just feel like there's some amount of work to be done there. So I'm just going to stop there, Srini.
Hey, thank you, Anushree. I mean, in a sense, just in this last 20 minutes, I literally can see a continuum of whereas Ritika and Titan CSR is talking about catalyzing more and more design, folks like the Levinson Foundation and Ford Foundation looking at building institutions which support and sustain this design. And actually, it's a question that Anushree you brought up, and it's going to be controversial when I state it, is you're talking about how you're going to be convincing really LPs who are in no hurry to deploy money. So it's going to be fundamentally really hard questions. And which brings me to the point, actually, to Pradeep. You and I have had a conversation in which we've been discussing, is the social sector too soft? I mean, that urgency to give objective numbers, measure, respond to say, this is how we deliver impact. This is the kind of shift which has happened. We see it in the the financial world or the for-profit world. How do you think we can get that into in the impact space? I'm not saying that everything should become for-profit, but as you're doing more social enterprises, how can this kind of rigor come in here? Do you have any thoughts there? First of all, do you agree with that point?
Agree with which point? I'm sorry, you made quite a few points.
The one about
I agree with all you said.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, just say it. Yeah.
About the point that I think a lot of folks in the social sector still are a little sort of hazy about the measurement, being more objective and being driven.
Yeah, see, it is a controversial statement, right? And I think everyone, honestly, I think everyone who's working in the sector has a role to play. So I think by, so whatever I'm going to say in no way is, obviously is no way an accusation or, a critique of everyone who's in the sector and who's doing wonderful work. Having said that, I think I was sharing with you, Srini and Anushree, the other day, that, first of all, many of us don't realize that this sector employs more number of people than the IT sector or auto sector. So it's a pretty large sector with a lot of people working in the sector, at least I'm talking about this country. So in such a large sector that, and this is a very old profession, if you may, right? Giving is a very old profession. People have been, giving in one way or the other for a very long time. In India also this has been. So in a sector that employs so many people and that's so old, it is interesting that we haven't seen too many disruptions in the way that people give, in the way that people actually do work on the ground. It's the same old. It's, mostly the same things over and over again. You have donors, you have implementing organizations, and then you have communities, right? And there's, except for a few differences in, the sectors and the geographies, it's pretty much the same. So yes, and I don't know if that's related to lack of capital, lack of professionals, lack of outside the box thinking. I don't know, right? I mean, I've been in the sector not as long as most of the others, I think, who have been. So yes, for someone, who sees this, I do feel that, maybe a little bit of urgency would do all of us good, right? Because all of these social sector issues that we're trying to address, I think most of them, sadly, are not going to be fixed, at least in my lifetime, right? That's the truth. Having said that, I think if we don't work on it with a sense of urgency, we're only going to prolong the time that it's going to take, and also the resources that it'll take to address these issues, whatever they are, whether it's climate change, gender issues, whatever they may be. So I do feel that a sense of urgency is missing. You're right. So whether it's soft or not, I don't know, but I feel like with all these wonderfully smart people and resources, and this panel is just a very good illustration of that. It is sad that we wouldn't be able to solve this problem, right? I mean, a recent topic that comes up often in not just this sector, but in any other sector is that, obviously I'm exaggerating this, but there is a higher chance of, Elon Musk actually creating an inhabitable planet, before most of the social issues will be solved, which when you actually think about it is, quite a statement, right? I mean, and most probably true. So, and then the question that we all got to ask ourselves is, so what is it that's stopping us from actually working really hard, putting all the resources that we have, collaborating with each other to actually solve these issues? And it's totally possible. It just, I think this, whatever you want to call, coalition of the willing or whatever, people are all doing wonderful work, but I think we require more focused and collaborative ways of addressing these problems. And, take impact as an example. I think sometimes we get caught up in these definitions also, though I know that there's all good intentions when we're trying to define impact and saying that we should work towards, actual outputs and outcomes. Sometimes I feel, and this is a conversation, Srini, that we had a few days ago, sometimes I feel, depending on where you are in the impact spectrum of how advanced you are in, your understanding of impact and not, I think maybe for a large group of people, when they're trying to decide what could possibly be impact, maybe for that group of people who are completely new to this or very uncertain, an impact could be as simple, but as important as saying, as long as you work with any program on, disadvantaged or marginalized communities, right? If you just identify that as the beneficiaries or the communities that you're working with, for me, that's good enough as an impact. And as an example, if, we could say that if you're working and if your programs are focused on women, for me, that's good enough. For me, that's a good step to say that this program is the kind of impact that I would like, right? And, or, whatever, or a specific geography or a specific region or whatever. And then, of course, and as they kind of, advance in that impact spectrum, we can get more nuance in the way we do the definitions. But there's just a small example of how maybe that's the urgency that we need, right? For everyone focused on, defining it the way that's most comfortable for us, but at the same time, that takes us one step, forward in addressing this overall large societal issues.
Pradeep, I'm actually pulling in a lot of principles that I heard over the last 3 days. And I remember in one of the panels, which was in health tech, a panelist talking about how entrepreneurs should first get into shape, start demonstrating what they do well in a small area, and then scale, right? It almost is exactly the same thing, even if you're trying to create impact and measure it, get clear on what you want to do. And I think, and I hear you, and I think that's true, that there are funders, there are folks to support people who are doing a really good job. Right? And that good job does not have to mean that you're all over the place and in every geography doing everything for everyone. Right? So, like for example, Ritika, when you just said the focus is product and we will support design. I think that's a fantastic example of just saying that we know what this place needs and you will just back it regardless of how many fail or how many succeed. But I'm just taking Pradeep's point to say, as you support these folks, and it's very bounded to hardware. How do you visualize the future for those who you supported initially? How do you help them get into viable, scalable businesses or partnerships?
Yeah. So, Shri, Pradeep's point, I would just like to add that, okay, my voice is echoing. Can you mute yourselves? Yeah, thank you. So, when you take a step, but it's like if we don't measure impact where we want to reach, we don't have a direction. So hence it's very important that we have some measurables, whether it is impact or rather let's call it outcomes. We need to have that direction for us. So that's what we do in our grants. Our grants are projectized in a manner that is for enterprise development for the entrepreneurs. And while the program was open to for anyone to apply, the NGOs, or you could even be working in a corporate and working on a social impact product, you could apply. The nature and the competitiveness of the jury was such that all the 8 grantees are social entrepreneurs. So so it sort of made us think that way for them. And the grants are the projects of the grants, while they focus on impact, they also look at how can we build the enterprise. How can these entrepreneurs be self-reliant, how can they become sustainable through this grant. And it's basically like a small door that opens in various avenues for them. That's how we design the grant. And there are 2 ways to look at it. One is the capacity building at the entrepreneur level, and then the enterprise level we look at networking. So while we are concentrating on our projects, and our projects are to do with social impact, and for example, if there is a product that needs to be installed, it needs to be installed in public places under the grant, vis-a-vis private place. So that's the mandate of the grant. Whereas we are connecting the entity to various other private entities who will then become their customers. So this is what we are doing, kind of balancing it to help have the enterprise develop through the grant.
Yeah, I think that's I love that example of the way you said your grant supports a public installation versus while alongside that you enable private partnerships, right? And it's almost like what Pradeep says, you've got it bounded, finite, the specific literal stage gates that they have to pass through to demonstrate that they are creating a change. Yeah, and actually, Maggie, I think that sort of resonates the way we've been working to show the movement of companies. And I'm taking one point, I'm actually taking from where Ritika left off about the partnerships piece. Because I know the Lemelson Foundation is very keen on catalyzing such an ecosystem. Right? It's not just a specific 1 or 2 institutions. Frankly, even for us, it cannot be one will grow. We want a lot of will grow, right? We need more. So how do you look at catalyzing such partnerships such that, like Pradeep said, it's a coalition of the like-minded?
Yeah, so I'll borrow a lot from both of my fellow panelists who just made comments. I think what we've learned is that this is not fast work. If it were, we wouldn't be looking at these very large challenges. And we've approached it with an acceptance that we're going to fail and our partners are going to fail. And it's required to fail and be transparent about failures in order to iterate and learn. So there's an emphasis for us on, similar to how investors and incubators make choices about teams for startups that they want to work with. You identify teams and systems that are efficient at learning and embrace that iterative process so that they can evolve their approaches to be effective. And then I would say, it's been a journey of supporting partners and building that level of transparency, but our measures have also evolved as well. So initially, I think it was our most direct relationships are typically with intermediaries supporting enterprises in some way. So the ongoing progress in developing their capacity is one way of measuring. Ultimately, it is also about their portfolio performance. So are these companies growing and having impact? But it's about, at the systems level, you can try to evaluate cycles. How long does it take companies? Are we seeing reduced cycles of development from between critical milestones? But we tend to be more qualitative because ultimately, we're looking for increased resource availability, as you said, Srini, not just for our partners or for the companies. It's all the way upstream to how are research agendas being formed? Is there an increasing amount of research funding towards addressing the problems that we care about, and downstream for the capital as well. So we think about that resource availability. We think about, the productive collaborations between complementary roles within this system as a measure, and that resulting in increasing efficiency. Because we've learned is that in inefficient systems, social innovators almost always are the ones who bear that cost of an inefficient system. They're the ones that have higher transaction costs and higher rates of failure. When the system increases efficiency, and there are these measures of productive collaborations and increased resource availability, you see them succeed. And ultimately, we're working towards the Sustainable Development Goals and those KPIs as the metric for that. And so for us, it's really like, how are we getting there, and how are we demonstrating that this system we're supporting and the partners that we work with can have some space to experiment and figure out what are the best mechanics to contribute to those goals.
Thank you. I'm actually blending a question. I'm getting in a question from one of the audience asked is, would there be agreement amongst the four of you that philanthropic goals could be controversial, deep here, better achieved by employing strategies other than just grant making? Do any of you want to take that?
Yeah, so Srini, grant making is usually confused with doling out of monetary funds. So just clarifying that, when we say grant making, it is in fact a very, very thought out project, and with certain milestones which are discussed along with the entrepreneur. So and we keep correcting it as we go along, as the rubber hits the road and we get onto the ground, and there are challenges, and there might be delays of kinds that we can't control because of external situations. At the same time, there might be surprises. So we keep working along with the entrepreneur, but at the same time, these grants are not doled out like monetary funds. They are given in tranches, and milestones are thoroughly discussed, and they are in fact projectized along with it's a co-creation with the entrepreneur. So that's how
Correct. The word grant can just be misleading. I think Maggie, Pradeep, you, Anushri, I'll repeat the question for you because I think the way Ritika said it, it's almost like project finance. It is R&D or product development funding, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not quite sure what the question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Maggie.
Oh, I'm happy to jump in there as well. I know that we 100% agree. Grants as the only tool in a toolbox would be extremely limiting. I do think that there are two key points. One, there are very creative ways to use your grants as the tool that we are best suited towards deploying. It is often actually creating knowledge products and sort of pushing the field, and so actually like influencing and as we learn, trying to make sure that the field is learning. I think there's also, sometimes it's grants, sometimes it's direct. In our domestic work in the US, we do a lot more direct sort of, we convene, we create communities of practice. And I think that there's a lot that can be done to build build that coalition of the willing when you do that in concert with grants to incentivize collaboration in certain actions. But I would also say the other point is sometimes we're limited by our form factor. While we do make program-related investments and grants, and those program-related investments can take the form of debt and equity, frankly, we're not optimized for doing that. And sometimes there are regulatory challenges to doing that make it an inefficient way to do it. So we try to find ways to use the tools and form factor that we have to effectively address whatever the problem is. And I think, good examples are things like, we ended up doing guarantees directly to companies just to see how terrible the leverage was for those companies in accessing working capital before working with you, Srini, to figure out, oh, if we just grant some funding to Vilro to manage a revolving guarantee fund, then we can unlock a lot more working capital for a much larger pool of companies. So that's an instance where I think it demonstrates Ritika's point about, you can use grants to be more creative in the solutions that you're able to offer.
In fact, I'm actually pulling a thread from what Ritika said and Maggie you said to say, Pradeep, let me call a donor or a grant maker an LP just for this conversation. Do you think LPs today are just too soft? Not as being as demanding? It could be even to a VC, who. Huh?
I said you keep asking me these soft questions. but no, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think when you say that, no, I don't know. I think, see, everyone's, I wouldn't necessarily say they're soft. I think all of us are learning in this journey, and I think different, if you may, LPs have different ways that they work, right? Some of them have a very high touch because, the kind of, the instruments that they use, financial instruments they use, maybe requires a high touch, right? When you're doing a guarantee product, for example, like what Maggie said, you do require that high touch, for that guaranteed product, because you're trying to put something together that has a lot of moving parts. Whereas maybe in a grant to a certain outcome, maybe it doesn't require high touch. So I don't think so. I think, in fact, rather than saying soft or not, I think what is required and has always been required is that, seeing this as a partnership. I think, organizations that give resources, right, whether they're donors or whatever, I think they should see more as just giving resources, right? I think or giving more than just financial resources. I think to form a partnership, because, the folks who are providing the resources, those who are implementing, all have eventually the same goal. All of them are trying to get to the same outcome using different ways, right? The donor uses their resources, the implementing organization on the ground, the social enterprises uses implementation and, their knowledge to actually deliver it. I think aligning that and then realizing that, for a donor, work doesn't stop when you just actually, cut the check or provide the resource, I think is the important thing here. And maybe in a way, what you mean by asking, are they soft? If you're asking, are they just giving the support and sitting back? Then yes, then maybe that's not the right thing to do, right? You should be more actively involved because it is a team effort. I think these collaborations, going back to my earlier point, I think the sense of urgency, if you may, also comes from all of us realizing that we're all, when a donor gives a support to an enterprise, so a social enterprise or an NGO on the ground, it's basically because they know that we're aligned on our intended outcome. So I think it would be wasted opportunity if they don't work together towards this outcome.
Got it. I think, but it's also, I'm sensing it is also a spectrum. You couldn't go overboard in almost, say, micromanaging a work, but at the other hand, you can't be so hands-off that everything flies, right? But Anushri actually jumped in and said she also wanted to answer the same question. I know, Anushri, your internet is poor, so you're forgiven for having your video off, but everyone knows that it's you talking.
Sure. Thanks for that, Srini, and apologies for this internet fiasco. So I wanted to actually just take a minute to answer the grant question. And I think, at the risk of repeating everything that everyone else has said, I also feel that we've seen that the grant instruments sometimes allow donors to be a little more hands-on, right? Because a lot of the times when you are actually writing a check to the fund, the GP or the fund is doing the heavy lifting of due diligence, selection, performance management, exits, etc. And the investors expected to sit back, whereas when you have a grant-based structure, it actually allows you to be very involved and immersed into the social problem that you're trying to crack, right? And I think the deployment of the instrument is also a function of the problem, the social problem that you're trying to address, right? So if we move away from our obsession with different types of tools and instruments and have the big picture in mind to say, if this is the problem that I'm trying to solve, what is the best form of instrument that helps address this issue? Then what you were talking about, Srini, the spectrum, the entire toolbox becomes available to you, right? In terms of LPs, and that's in a way what we're trying to do at Waterfield, is to work with LPs. I think it's not a lack of intent, right? Like we've kind of, I think I'm convinced of that. I think it's not a lack of intent, but a lack of sensitization and literacy in terms of what the social sector really requires, right? So we find ourselves, and in fact, we've had a good problem to solve where our LPs have told us, hey, we want to be a little more hands-on here. We want regular reporting on impact. We want quarterly meetings with the GPs to actually tell us what's happening on the impact sort of spectrum, right? So I guess, again, there's a lot of capacity building, a lot of hand holding that we will have to do in order for LPs to really, sort of drive this focus on impact, on solving a problem, right? And I guess, we've also seen very good results. So we've in fact created, because our LPs have actually driven us to do that, we've created in-house frameworks that assess GPs, not investees, but GPs on, their impact processes and how serious they are about selecting and incorporating, integrating impact across that entire life cycle, right? And this has been purely as a response to what our LPs are asking us for. So I think we're actually seeing that we need to build on the momentum, and they're going to require a lot of hand-holding, a lot of support, a lot of data and research, like what Maggie was talking about. I think we've faced that constraint where we've been asked to kind of, do some benchmarking on impact funds, some benchmarking on, what is a good impact to be achieved, right? What's that level of impact? And we've really not had those answers, right? So I think the ecosystem will also have to step up to support the LPs, but we are definitely seeing a positive trend of, them driving this movement.
I think, Anushri, you gave away a lot of good secrets when you started talking about what is an acceptable level of impact, or even what is impact as an LP who's putting in hard-earned money. Those are fantastic questions, right? And I think as even for Will Grow, and as we work with, if I can call the Lemons Foundation our LP, I keep thinking on, am I telling them I'm giving them good numbers, right? And I mean, numbers is just a placeholder here, but are they getting a good picture of how the change is happening? And I think in many senses, Pradeep is also trying to do the same thing when you're talking about systemic, painting the whole picture. It's not single dimensional, right? And I think those are fabulous points. As Will Grow personally, and I personally try to catalyze more believers for supporting change at a systemic level, for supporting change which can bring in fundamental, shifts such that the underserved can be part of their own progress, right? And they're not always on a dole, so to speak. Yeah. And I'm at this point, I've also been using a lot of this question which is coming in, but any of you have any observations on how this conversation went? Because, after that, I'm going to sort of wrap up. We're almost out of time. And I know it's also Friday evening, also Maggie feels Friday morning, and you have snow to shovel. Any last observations? You've heard a quite interesting thing, Pradeep, Pratika, Anushri. I think there's food for thought on how to build and catalyze this space in India, which for me is a stated avowed goal. And I think for many of you here too. Any observations before I sort of wrap up?
It sounds to me as though, regardless of, each of us sort of being distinct funders with strategies, regardless of the role that we're trying to play, our goals are pretty much the same: creating projects for social impact that no longer rely solely on philanthropic support. These projects take the form of enterprises in many cases, but they must develop capacity to become self-sustaining through either government funding or market dynamics and mechanisms so that their work for public good really does become woven into our social fabric. And I think for us, like that is the path to sustainable development. And so that's sort of where I see the opportunities for collaboration and complementary funding and support that catalyzes that system.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you. Any observations, Ritika, Anushree, Pradeep?
So, Srini, I would just like to, sort of, it's very encouraging and it's so heartwarming to see all of us here. And the fact that, we all come from different ways of working and different ways of approaching the same issues, and it just seems such a right time for any, young designer to just delve into this and seek support. So that's my message, and that's what we have built the design impact movement for. And the time is ripe, and there is so much opportunity and there is so much support. This is what I am carrying back from this panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ritika.
And
Shri, I guess, sorry,
sorry.
please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no, I was going to say, I think just the fact that you have a very diverse set of, in a way, stakeholders here on this call, right, representing different pieces of the, even if you may donor puzzle, I think itself is a testimony to the fact that, there are several people, trying to solve this problem in several different ways, and, eventually converging where there are opportunities together. And I think, in fact, organizations like yours are providing that convergence opportunity for us, which I think is incredible, right? Because for most of us, otherwise we would be, diverging in what we do. And I think so to have organizations like yours that kind of provide that opportunity to kind of funnel, because we all have, like I said, different outcomes and doing it in our own different ways, which is fine. But I think once in a while we need this convergence. And I think this is where organizations like yours play a huge role.
Thank you, Pradeep. You're very kind. Anushree, you were going to say.
No, Srini, I think I was just going to echo what Pradeep said, that sometimes, when you're working in the sector and you see all the issues, especially the systemic challenges that one has to address, you can become very negative. You can actually sort of, give up. But I think, if you actually adopt a problem solving sort of mindset, all of us know that there are challenges that need to be solved, but we also know, and we've seen enough to believe that if we come together as an ecosystem, then we can at least make a start, right? So I continue to remain optimist. I continue to kind of hope that, social entrepreneurship, impact investment will eventually deliver on its promise of creating large scale sustainable impact, and that we all need to make it happen together.
Right. Thank you, Anushree. And as I wrap up, I want to thank each one of you because I think, like I felt, and like each of you felt, we are all wanting to achieve the same thing, but there's so many different paths to achieving it. And I'm really glad we could sort of converge, not just our thinking, but to see the missions are aligned. Yeah. So I'm really grateful for that, and I've been sort of a lot of kind words here. But as I close, I just also want to sort of, it's the end of Unconvention. It was a little different from us. I mean, not even a little, very different, because we've always had it in person. We used to have it in this hotel, and I know we used to meet and shake hands, have this beer in the evening, talk a lot, and way more than what we're just doing now. I'm sad that we couldn't do that, but I'm also glad that Maggie was able to join for the first time. So in many ways, there are some good things which happened. But at this point, I also want to thank our knowledge partners, who supported us in this, which is the Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelter Tech, the Cartier Women's Initiative, the National Skill Development Corporation. I also want to thank a whole bunch of our technical partners, the speakers, the speakers who came before you. We've had almost 150 of them. All our friends from the ecosystem who have been participating, all the entrepreneurs who attended. We had almost 800 plus folks that have been with us over these last 3 days. And it's been packed sessions, right? And stuff has been running in parallel. I think all of you helped us bring life to the fundamental purpose of Unconvention. So this year, we visualized Unconvention, as the pandemic was biting in, we visualized Unconvention for us to help develop a shared understanding of what we need, right? What could happen and what probably will happen again and again, and hence what we need to build that resilience, right? And this resilience was required because for us, if we work with social enterprises, we wanted to see what it will take to build this resilience in this enterprise of the social enterprise ecosystem. And the second thing is, despite all this lockdown, despite all the the constraints on physical interaction, we were hoping via suddenly this new virtual medium to make as many connections as possible between enterprises, investors, funders, financiers, technical partners. And I think we've been able to achieve a lot of that to a big degree, right? And we've had more than 90 networking launches. A whole host of investors came in. I think every room was packed. I mean, there were a whole bunch of CEOs, technical experts we otherwise would have never heard. Yeah. I think the number of entrepreneurs who engaged was phenomenal, the highest ever. And interestingly, not just here, like I mentioned earlier on, we've had some amazingly candid, honest conversations. I haven't had such honest conversations before at Unconvention, so I'm really grateful to all of them. And as we close, thank you all. Have a great evening. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.